Hello, Dog Nation. I am Brandon Adams. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented by Pella Window and Door of Georgia. We're Go for 2 in 22, and we're happy to have you checking in on all across of our video platforms here right now. Great weekend for Stetson Bennett. Thought he handled his business so well up in New York, and it was an awesome thing to see the Georgia brand in the spotlight in such a big way in the media capital of the free world, really, in New York City. That was a fun thing to see. We're going to talk about that on today's show. Continue to get ready for the college football playoff. Ohio State looms here in the Peach Bowl coming up in just a few days. We are very excited about that as well. This is just a fun time to be a Georgia fan. It's a great holiday season because Georgia, in its pursuit of another elite recruiting class, another national championship, and everything else is all right there in the middle of it. I am also so happy to be back in the saddle again today after a little bit of an odd week last week. To be back to normal this week is a lot of fun for me there as well. John Stinchcomb stops by. We have not talked to John here in a little bit, so that's going to be fun too. So what do you say we don't hesitate any longer and get it started right now? DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented by Pella Window and Door of Georgia, and it begins right now.
Today's episode of DawgNation Daily is brought to you by Pella Window and Door of Georgia, viewed to be the best.
Presented by DawgNation.com, this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
Let me just say a couple of quick things here before we get rolling with the show. One of these fun, one of these kind of serious. Let me do the fun thing first. Y'all, it is so great to be back. I had such a great time last week, and I'll tell you more about that here coming up. The folks from Royal Caribbean really rolling out the red carpet for us, and their hospitality is so awesome. What a great time it was to be on board Wonder of the Seas, and I'll tell you more about that later on. We just had a really great time. I'm thankful for the opportunity, but I'm also thankful that all of you have kind of welcomed us back now to do the show as we normally do here today. It is just really good to be back, and I am so excited about the rest of the month here and what we hope extends beyond that into a mission of Go for 2 in 22. We are really, really excited about that, and hopefully you'll see that excitement reflected in what we do on today's show. On the serious note, there's obviously a lot of sadness and concern here in the kind of part of the world we call SEC country here right now, and a lot of this relates to Mississippi State coach Mike Leach. Sincere prayers going out for him. We're going to talk more about this later on the show, but at least wanted to make mention of this off the top, that Coach Leach is going through a very serious thing right now, and our thoughts and prayers deeply, truly, sincerely are with him. We're going to talk more about this here in a moment, but I at least wanted to mention that off the top of the show as well, and then kind of try to awkwardly get into the topic at hand as it relates to Georgia. This was an incredible weekend for the Dogs, and Stetson Bennett was a Heisman finalist. We were live on video Tuesday night to celebrate that. We kind of popped back on Friday to kind of respond to some of the backlash, but the bottom line is, when you see Bennett in New York this weekend, I think I'm reminded, or maybe it's validated is the word I'm looking for, why so many of us wanted to see Georgia have a Heisman finalist for such a long time. There is just something about this that's really cool. And yeah, congratulations to Caleb Williams, who wins the award. Obviously a very deserving candidate in his own right, had a very good season. But there is something about just being in New York City. When you see the way in which Bennett got all the attention that he got this week, and I thought the ceremony on TV, I don't always watch the full thing all the way through. It's kind of long. But I did watch it on Saturday night, and it was just kind of cool to see a Georgia guy be a part of this. So I think we were reminded of why it is we wanted a Georgia player to be in this. Last year we kind of made the big push for JD to NYC. Just being in New York on this weekend, there's something about that. I said this, I think it was Tuesday night, that the Heisman Trophy ultimately is kind of a measure of relevance. Whatever it's supposed to be, going to the best player, whatever else, what it really is a measure of what is relevant, who is relevant in college football, and Georgia clearly right now has a very high level of that relevance, and that was kind of reflected in this Heisman story over the course of the weekend. And beyond that, what I liked about Georgia being a part of this is that it was the aspect of Georgia that we want to see reflected. This was not just Georgia in the spotlight. It was Georgia in the spotlight showing off all the things that we like about UGA, the things that make the program unique, the things that make the program successful, the thing that makes the program on the doorstep of possibly winning another national championship. A lot of those terrific attributes were reflected in the Stetson Bennett story as it was told in New York City in this Heisman situation here this week. In fact, I want to give you an example of this. So Kirby Smart was interviewed by Holly Rowe. Now, I think there is something really, really uncommonly great about the very short interview that Smart did as it reflects to Stetson Bennett. I want you to hear a portion of this. And then I kind of want to talk about this, about what it means about Bennett, and obviously the amazing story of his career, but the larger meaning of all of this as it relates to UGA. And this is the kind of thing that maybe would have been easy to miss if you weren't listening closely. So do me a favor. For the next couple of seconds, listen closely to Kirby Smart, and then let me tell you why I think this is a really, really cool reflection of what matters at Georgia. Here's Kirby from ESPN TV on Saturday night.
What are you thinking at that moment that has now led us to this moment that he goes from walk-on to Heisman finalist?
Wow. The American dream. He won over his teammates by the way he performed on the scout team, and he just kept getting better. And we kept thinking he wasn't good enough, and he kept proving us wrong over and over and over again.
Let me tell you something about Kirby Smart right there. What Smart does in the way that he talks about Stetson Bennett, that is not what most people would do in that situation. Kirby Smart is the head coach of Georgia. Kirby Smart is Stetson Bennett's coach. When your player is a Heisman finalist, it would be very easy for any of us, if given a chance to talk, to cast ourselves as the hero in this story. For instance, if I was Kirby Smart, knowing that it has not just been Bennett who's been criticized over the course of the last couple of years from time to time and taking a lot of heat even going into this Heisman ceremony this particular weekend. It's not just been Bennett who's taken some of that criticism. It's been Kirby Smart himself who's taken some of that criticism too. Smart has been criticized as Kirby just wants some South Georgia kid at quarterback because of whatever reason that the internet kind of makes up in any given moment. Or Kirby Smart's so stubborn. Kirby Smart's so set in his ways. Kirby Smart's so whatever about choosing Bennett as opposed to choosing some other quarterback that at different times the media or fans or whatever has sort of thought Kirby Smart was supposed to choose. So understanding all of that, and Kirby Smart is, of course, aware of all of this, understanding all of that, how easy would it be for Kirby Smart to cast himself as the hero in the story? In other words, he could have very easily said, hey, all of y'all have been wrong about Bennett the entire time, and I've been trying to tell you. All of y'all haven't thought that Stetson Bennett was ever good enough, and yet all this time, deep down, I knew this, and I smiled and laughed as he went out there and proved it to all of you. But that's not what Kirby Smart says right there. Kirby Smart says, we kept thinking he wasn't good enough. So this wasn't an example of the Bennett haters getting it wrong or the media overlooking the really cool story of Stetson Bennett. This is Kirby Smart being brutally honest, cold, hard truth, where he himself says, hey, I kept over and over again thinking that Stetson Bennett was not going to be good enough to be the quarterback of this team. And over again, Stetson Bennett kept proving me wrong. And to have that kind of confidence, to be Kirby Smart and be self-confident enough to go out there and say, hey, the thing that makes Stetson Bennett so great is not even I saw this coming. Even though I have full, unfettered access to everything that goes on with the Georgia program, not even I saw this coming. Bennett surprised even me. And I think that's a really cool level of honesty from Smart. I think that was a nice thing to hear. And then later on that same interview, I'm not going to play this part of the clip for you, he also goes on to talk about how that Bennett just earned all of this in practice. He first earned the trust of this team by how he performed as a scout team quarterback, and then later on he earned the remainder of that trust based on what he did in practice day after day after day. And let me tell you why I think that's so special. It's because this is what Kirby Smart's saying, that Bennett wasn't his pick for quarterback necessarily, but Bennett was judged the same way that all Georgia players are judged on how they measure up to the standard. Bennett met the standard, and therefore the job became his. And that's a pretty awesome promise to be made to a current or future Georgia player on the basis of how the Stetson Bennett story gets told here. That, hey, even if you're on scout team, you'll still be evaluated. And if you meet the standard, you're the guy. Hey, you're going to get a chance at practice every day to come out there and work. And it's not going to be fun. It's going to be really hard. The practices, as a million Georgia players have said, will be more difficult than the games. The grind that you do on a daily basis will be more difficult than the grind that you have to be a part of on Saturdays when you got 93,000 people cheering your name. During the week, those fans aren't there. The media isn't there. There is no band playing. But if you can prove yourself worthy of that you don't have to worry about a coach not liking you or politics or whatever else, it's simply a standard. And if you meet the standard, you're the guy. That's what Stetson Bennett kind of proves about Georgia. I think that's an awesome thing. And Kirby Smart, in the way that he talks about Stetson Bennett, allows Stetson to be the hero of his own story, but also to kind of demonstrate how it is that Georgia can cultivate a story like this. I think that's incredible. And then I think it kind of speaks to what Georgia can still do from here. Because ultimately, why is it that Stetson Bennett, in the minds of most of us, why was he Heisman worthy? Why was he worthy of being in a discussion like this? I think for me, the simplest thing is there are all kinds of people who kind of cite all kinds of stats, and listen, that's fine, and then that's I'm sure that's an accurate argument in favor of Bennett. But for me, it kind of comes down to this: what has he done in the biggest games? SEC championship, he was at his best. Tennessee game this year, he was at his best. Kick off the season against Oregon, he was at his best. National championship a year ago, he was at his best. Michigan game, Orange Bowl, coming off a Georgia loss, he was once again at his best. There is something about Stetson Bennett that has allowed him to raise his level of play in the games that have mattered most. And listen, there are times when I think that stuff like that just might be a coincidence. This is myth making. This is somehow, kind of trying to craft a legend that doesn't necessarily actually exist. It's just kind of the thing that makes for a good story, and who wants to ruin a good story, so therefore we keep telling it. However, there's another aspect of Stetson Bennett where I think you're left to maybe conclude that it's not necessarily a coincidence that he has played his best when the heart's beating just a little bit faster, when the self-doubt maybe creeps in a little more aggressively. It may not be exactly a coincidence that he's been at his best in moments like that. Because frankly, I think the best stuff we heard from Bennett last week may not have been in New York City for the Heisman Trophy ceremony or any of the stuff leading up to that. Our buddy Connor Riley, who we'll talk to tomorrow, did an incredible job of covering that. But the actual best comments that Bennett may have made all last week actually was related to the Brandon Burlsworth Trophy. This is the trophy that goes out to the top walk-on in college football. Bennett was nominated a year ago, won it this year. Burlsworth is a guy who was kind of an amazing story going back to his time playing at Arkansas. And Bennett was talking about Burlsworth near the end of his acceptance of this award this past week. And it's easy to imagine as he talks about that he's actually talking about himself. And we just heard Kirby say a moment ago, hey, we kept thinking this guy was not good enough. He was a scout team quarterback. We didn't want to offer him a scholarship. Then we did want to offer him a scholarship, but we didn't think he'd ever play. He goes to junior college. Okay, we'll bring you back, but you're going to be buried on the bench. You're going to the 2020 season. We're not going to give you any look towards being the starting quarterback in this team. We're not giving you any chance of that at all. Those are the sort of tangible, I guess, examples of the moments in which Kirby Smart said, we just didn't ever believe this guy could get it done. Well, from Bennett's own perspective in talking about Burlsworth and what he endured as a player at Arkansas, it's kind of easy to imagine maybe Bennett's also talking about himself a little bit too. This is from last week. Bennett, as he accepted the Burlsworth Award, let me let you hear that.
I feel like I know Brandon a little bit just because we've been there, man, and we've been down. Like, football, growing up, it was the thing that you were best at. It was the thing that you believed in. It was the thing you spent the most time doing. You thought you were pretty good in your hometown, right? And then you walk on to college and come and find out that, hey, this thing that you said you're best at in the world, that you spend the most time at in the world, that you care about in the world, well, it ain't good enough to play here. And so when people talk about Brandon and his legacy, it's hard to remember that, but I think it's important too, because he didn't just run bleachers a lot, right? He didn't just do more push-ups than other people. He came out and thought he had a good practice one day, and then his coach still told him he wasn't good enough, right? And that's a long look in the mirror. That's dark when you get down that road. But that's why he's so special, because he took that mirror and he broke it over his knee and he became an All-American and he got drafted.
It's an awesome series of comments from Bennett. I'm going to try not to be too blowhardy here, but I'm going to allow myself at least one indulgence to say this, is that most people design their lives to avoid the feeling that Bennett just described. The feeling of, I tried my hardest and I still failed, because that is kind of a dark thing to consider. Most people will do whatever they can, self-sabotage or whatever, to prevent themselves from ever actually feeling the feeling of, I tried my hardest and I still wasn't good enough. But if you allow yourself to kind of bump up against that, as Bennett says that Burlsworth once did, and we would say that Bennett himself has kind of done, Can you imagine the scar tissue that gets formed around that? Can you imagine the veneer of toughness that you take on when you experience those feelings that come with, hey, I gave this my all to play for my dream team, the Georgia Bulldogs. We know how much Stetson grew up as a Georgia fan. This is his ultimate dream, and yet time after time after time he was told, actually, you're not good enough. Can you imagine the kind of mental toughness you create through all of that? So maybe understanding what Bennett has been through, what he has pushed himself to endure through, maybe that makes it a little bit easier to understand that when the pressure's big in a Michigan game or an Alabama national championship or a Tennessee game in which the entire world was falling in love with the Vols or an SEC championship this past Saturday, maybe it's easy to understand why Bennett has somehow found a way to find an extra gear in some of those biggest games because of what mentally he's had to endure just to prove that he was worthy of being a part of the team that he had dreamed of playing for his entire life. I thought the weekend was incredible, and Bennett may not have won, but I think he was reminding us all weekend of why we have viewed him as such a winner over the course of the last couple of years. Kirby was great with the things that he said. Stetson was great throughout the week. This was an unbelievable celebration of college football this weekend and the role that a guy like Stetson Bennett plays in all of that. I was really glad to have been able to take that all in. I think a lot of Dog Nation feels the same way. This was just a cool time to be a dog. My name's Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. We're presented today by Pella Window and Door of Georgia, and we are glad to have you with us. No matter how you get us today, live on video, 10 a.m., Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, Twitch, from the radio at noon, Athens Sports Radio 960 The Ref, available as a podcast as well, wherever you find them, including the world-famous DawgNation.com. Been a while since we've been kind of doing this in our normal format, and it is good to be back doing it again today. And we are so appreciative from our friends at Pella Window and Door of Georgia for making it all possible. And like the one thing I've heard a lot since I was gone is, BA, you didn't miss much from a weather standpoint. Apparently the weather's been pretty bad here over the course of the last little bit. And anytime we have bad weather this time of year, I always think about Pella Windows and Doors because their job is to kind of protect you from all of that, because when it's cold and windy and rainy outside, you want all that junk staying on the outside of your house where it's supposed to be, and that toasty heat or whatever you have kind of going on from a climate control standpoint. You want that on the inside because it's expensive. You don't want that creeping out of poorly fitted windows and doors. And so that's what our friends at Pella Window and Door of Georgia are all about. They also have great savings opportunities right now. And they are just that product that survey after survey, homeowners here in our market will say year after year, this is the brand leader. This is the market leader. These are the folks who are doing it better than anybody else. You can find that out for yourself when you visit the Experience Center right there in Duluth. You can put your hands on the product. You can feel what makes it different. You can talk to a Pella expert, and they can walk you through all of those options as well. Installation or the full product line, you can get all of that. As I told you, how about some great savings too? Between now and the end of the month, you can get 0% APR for 24 months or 50% off qualifying installation. So stop by and see them right there in Duluth, or find them online. PellaofGA.com/DawgNation. PellaofGA.com/DawgNation. You can also give them a call, 678-638-1496. That is 678-638-1496. Pella Window and Door of Georgia is viewed to be the best. All right, let's get into Around the Doghouse here. It's assisted by our friends at AAA. And then after that, we're going to talk to John Stinchcomb. I have not talked to John here in a little while, but we're going to get into that with him coming up in just a bit. So we'll do that then. Before that, though, as I said, Around the Doghouse, assisted by AAA here today. And I thought that Stetson Bennett had a really cool Instagram post. And I want to use this as kind of a springboard to sort of talk about something as it relates to Ohio State. But Bennett has let it be known it's now kind of time to turn the page. That he had the spotlight on him for the Heisman Trophy ceremony, but it's kind of time now to sort of turn the page. And he did this with kind of a fun series of images. Let me show you the first one here. This is just sort of the regular post and caption where he says, hey, it was a fun week, but the real season starts now. And if you see that, if you're watching on video, you get the little sort of side scroll thing you can do to kind of see some other images. I'll show you the full collection here, and I won't play all the video clips and things like that he had. But he had Kobe Bryant basically saying that being up 2-0 was not enough, and the great scene from Major League about going out and winning the whole blank thing. Karis Jackson, the great quote about trying to put numbers on these walls. And then he kind of takes an old saying about there are good ships and wood ships and ships that sail the sea, but the best ships are, it's supposed to be, I guess, friendships, but he changed that to championships. May they always be. So Stetson letting it be known that the time for talking about him solely as a Heisman finalist are over, and the time to kind of get back talking about Georgia again as it makes a move towards the college football playoff. It's time for that to happen. And let me just say this. Here's what I think would be a mistake. That it was obviously a great week for Bennett, and a lot of Georgia fans were kind of aggressively defending Bennett because Tennessee fans were acting like Tennessee fans over the course of the last week, kind of being themselves, and that kind of brought out a certain version of Georgia. And there was even some of the back and forth stuff with the media. Doug Gottlieb kind of got involved in this over the course of the weekend, the radio host, and Georgia fans kind of went at him. But here's what I think would be a mistake. As Georgia not kind of fully turns its attention back to Ohio State and the game that's going to take place, as Georgia kind of gets ready to do all of that, I think it'd be a mistake to then take the energy that's exists around Bennett, what he's kind of proven about being a Heisman finalist and the sort of morons that he's proven wrong along the way, and now turn this game against the Buckeyes into some sort of a referendum on Stetson. Like, this is not going to be Stetson Bennett versus C.J. Stroud on December 31st. It's just not. And Stetson Bennett's not playing over the course of the next 2 games for Georgia to prove, well, he should have been the Heisman Trophy winner all along. That the story for Georgia remains unchanged. That Bennett was in New York, rightfully so, I believe, but he was there representing all of what has made Georgia great. And that's the same thing that would have been true had Jordan Davis been there last year. We also believe that J.D. should have been there, and if Davis had gone, he would have been a bit of an avatar for what made Georgia Georgia in 2021. There's an aspect of that which is, I think, true for Bennett here right now as well. In other words, what is it going to take to beat Ohio State in the Peach Bowl coming up on December 31st? It's all the things that make Georgia Georgia. It is a complementary brand of football. You have to have a big day defensively. You've got to find the right level of offense, too. You've got to have 22 guys, 11 on defense, 11 on offense, 11 more on special teams, which I guess is 33, but you get the point that I'm making here. You got to have everybody kind of playing at their highest and best level in order to get that done. And the reason why Georgia has been so much better than almost everybody else in the country over the course of the last couple of years is because there is no team that plays at the highest possible level across the board the way that Georgia kind of does. This is not a quarterback-dependent program because Georgia is so good in all the other areas. On some teams, Alabama last year, maybe Ohio State this year, that you need big play from your quarterback to kind of cover up some deficiencies you might have in other areas. That's just not the way that Georgia's built. So it has been a fun week. Frankly, it's been kind of a fun week kind of coming to Bennett's defense against some of the idiots who've said what they've said. That part's been fun. But now that you move back into full look ahead, as Bennett said, getting ready for the most important part of the season, go for 2 in 22 and winning that national championship, as you get ready to do all of that, I think it's important to kind of have the same conversation we've been having, is that Georgia has never been set up to be quarterback versus quarterback. This is not a Wild West gunslinger match. It wasn't true between Bennett and Bryce Young a year ago. It's not true between Bennett and C.J. Stroud here right now. The thing that makes Georgia Georgia is the full totality of what is actually Georgia. And so as we move back in time for the full preparation for the college football playoff, the full preparation for Ohio State, I think that's an important thing to keep in mind, and that is around the Doghouse today. It's presented by our friends at AAA, and, of course, we appreciate all of what AAA does for us. I've been traveling a lot here over the course of the last little bit, driving to be a part of our great cruise last week, going into Port Canaveral for that, but also just traveling a lot during the season, too, kind of finishing up a run through high school football and all of that. And as I've been driving around and doing all that, I'm glad to have that AAA membership card in my pocket in case something goes wrong. But AAA is also there for you when it comes to other things as well, including some great insurance products. How about home insurance? That it's really a great opportunity right now to get your home insurance through AAA as well, because when you get home insurance through AAA, you can qualify for something known as claim forgiveness. Now, here's how claim forgiveness works. It means your first claim is going to be forgiven when you're insured and claim-free with insurance through AAA for 5 years. You can check out all those benefits and get more on that by going to AAA.com/home insurance. That's AAA.com/home insurance. You can also give a call, 833-718-2075. That's 833-718-2075 for a lot more on that. AAA bringing around the Doghouse to us here today. All right, before we're done, we're going to get into the very serious situation of what may or may not be going on with Mike Leach right now. All we know is that he is in critical condition and prayers are being requested for him and earnestly and sincerely being given right now. We'll talk about that. But there's also some other news to get to around the SEC as well, in addition to our continued concern for Coach Leach. We're going to do a little bit of recruiting stuff before we're done, because there are a couple of notes on UGA recruiting that I don't think you should miss. So we'll touch on some of that before we're done. We have an unbelievable collection of golden shoes as well, as you might imagine, coming off such a big weekend. So we'll get to all of that before we wrap things up today. But for now, first time in a little while for us to welcome him back, and we do so with open arms. It's our buddy John Stinchcomb to react to everything going on around these dogs right now here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Pella, Window and Door of Georgia.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
As I mentioned, it's been a little while since we've talked to John Stinchcomb here on our program, so great to get a chance to do that right now. And, John, boy, a lot has happened since we last spoke. I guess let me begin with this. John, you are an alumnus. You're a huge stakeholder in the Georgia program. For you personally, how big of a deal was it to see Stetson in New York, kind of, a part of the conversation of the moment in college football, huge spotlight that kind of comes along with that. We had not seen that since Garrison Hurst, which predates your career by a long time. It's been a long, period of history, in other words, since Georgia's had a Heisman finalist. How much fun was it for you to watch Bennett be in that situation this weekend?
Oh, I loved it. And it's so funny to think that it's been 3 decades almost since Georgia's been represented in the Heisman. I mean, that's mind-blowing to me with the number of great players that have come through Athens. And I couldn't have been prouder to be a Bulldog the way that Stetson represented us during the festivities that led up to the announcement of Caleb's winning it. And, you look and think, what a great storyline that he is, but ambassador to the game. That as he represented Georgia on that national stage, and I love the support he's got from other players, and Jordan Davis's post that just rings to and speaks to the amount of trust and love that he has in that locker room. And I thought he did a great job. And it's always great to be a Bulldog, but anytime you're represented at the Heisman Trophy presentation, it certainly speaks to the level of play that he's risen to and the representation that he's made on the football field.
This is a little bit of an off-the-wall question. We're watching video on our screen right now of Bennett from the weekend, and one of the things he got some attention for was wearing the Georgia letter jacket with the red and I guess the black leather sleeves. My buddy Buck Ballou, I've seen him wear his before. Do you have one of those? Because, John, that's one of the most stylish things I've ever seen in my entire life. Do you have a Georgia letter jacket like that?
Doesn't it look good? It looks so sharp, and I thought he did a great job of, the other guys representing some other name brands on them, but for him to choose to represent the G, I think spoke volumes. Yeah, I have one. Now, could I put my hands on it? Would I be able to find it? I don't know that I could, but it's in a closet somewhere, I'm sure.
Well, the good news is, like a lot of people, to be completely frank, they go the wrong direction with their weight after their career, especially the skill position guys. And let's just be honest here. Some of those guys kind of go the wrong direction. But, John, you're way thinner now than when you played. So if you were to find it, you could absolutely still pull that off and wear it. My guess is that's at least a size larger than what your actual size is right now. So to me, that's the kind of thing you ought to be digging out right there, because unlike a lot of former players, we know yours would still fit.
Isn't it funny? We used to joke, we're in an offensive line room full of 300-plus pounders, and they're still sensitive about their weight, because we would go around the room saying, you're going to be 400, you're going to be 400, you're going to be 220. No, we're not. You always fight over it. So it's we were all fat and obese at the time. So it's funny to think that you're still sensitive about your weight. But, yeah, I think I could still fit in it. I might be able to put on a couple of layers between me and the actually outside jacket at this point, but that's a good thing.
That's good to know. There's this cliche out there of like, I live in so-and-so city, but I haven't visited the thing that so-and-so city's famous for. We have a tendency not to appreciate what we're closest to. I think for Stetson Bennett, there's an aspect of that too, of we are all so familiar with the Stetson Bennett story that we actually don't think about it all that much because it's kind of old hat to us here. But when you hear it through fresh ears, or when you see it through fresh eyes, the way we get a chance to this week, I think I'm reminded again of just how unique and special it all truly is, and frankly, how good of a storyteller Bennett is about his own journey here. I think that he has an incredible level of introspection, which makes him, I guess, a meaningful narrator of his own life here. It is remarkable what he has endured to be at the spot where he is right now, and I think living through it all kind of seemed like it was just the next step being taken each and every time. But this is not an easy journey to go through. If it was, more people would have done it. John, that was the thing I kept coming back to here this week as it relates to Stetson, is just how amazing the story is, and frankly how blind some of us end up being to it because we have been so close to it for such a long time.
It's amazing to me that he's not more bitter. You listen to him in the interviews, and he's constantly being discredited. I mean, you look at even his time in New York, and they're saying, how many different memes and posts on Twitter and Instagram did you see where it's like, he's the same age as Lamar Jackson, and look at all the stuff he did. Nobody seems to mention Chris Winkie. When he won the Heisman, he was almost 30. So every step of the way, even when he was being recruited, you're too small and you don't fit the protocol. When he came back to Athens and he's competing for that role, and he's going up against 5 stars and Jamie Newman and JT Daniels, the next great quarterbacks at Georgia, and no one was even considering Stetson. I got texts halfway through the national championship game saying, hey, we need to pull him. So this guy is constantly being discredited and not given the due that he deserves for the level of play that he's risen to and had to work his tail off to even get the opportunities to show and express on a football field. But yet when you talk to him, I mean, even after the SEC championship, he's being interviewed and saying, hey, you had a great performance. Tell me about the guys around you. He's like, okay, well, I'll do that. And also, I'm not a bad football player either. And what a great perspective that throughout this entire process, Stetson hasn't been like, at what point am I going to get the credit that I deserve, without people couching the comments as saying, it's really because you're surrounded by all these others. No, Stetson's a damn good quarterback and is humble more so than most in those situations, and is willing to share that credit, and even when they're backhanded compliments thrown his way.
I think that's exactly right. Another thing that's happened since you and I last spoke is, it's been a while now, is we now know that Georgia's going to play Ohio State in the Peach Bowl coming up December 31st. And, John, there's a lot to be said about how this game gets won, or, the different sort of storylines of the game. But the thing that I can't quite get over, and this is one of the things I mentioned to begin last week with some of the pre-recorded shows that we did, is I'm just overwhelmed by the size and the magnitude of this game. These are two programs that are the biggest that you get. They've been adjacent to each other in polls now seemingly forever, adjacent in recruiting rankings seemingly forever, going head-to-head over some of those recruits, obviously, from time to time. And now they're on the same field again for the first time. Ironically, mentioned 1992 earlier for Garrison Hurst in his Heisman finalist season. That was also the last time that Georgia played Ohio State. So another one of these sort of long tenured type ideas. But, John, that's the thing that I feel like you have to talk about first when it comes to Georgia and Ohio State. Before you get to who wins and how Georgia gets it done, it's just the overwhelming magnitude of the game. This is an enormous contest. This is what the college ball playoff is supposed to deliver us, these kinds of clashes of the Titans. And I believe that's exactly what the Buckeyes and the Dogs sort of feel like coming up here in Atlanta at the end of this month.
It's two blue bloods, two heavyweights on a national scale slugging it out, and I couldn't be happier as to when this is occurring, because there's not a more complete team than Georgia. And I think we saw when Ohio State played Michigan that they certainly have some warts. And, throughout the season, you look at Ohio State, what they were able to do. I mean, they can score points. They've got, at one time, arguably the best wide receiver room in college sports, and a quarterback that can deliver to them. And that's a dangerous proposition. I think the announcement that Smith and Jigba is, rather than getting healthy for the next few weeks and getting ready for our game, he's going to try to get healthy and prepare for the NFL draft. I was not saddened to hear that news. Right. So as a Georgia fan, I think you respect what Ohio State brings to the table, but this is one of those matchups that has national draw just because of the prowess that both teams hold and bring into this game. It's going to be an exciting one, not only for Dog fans, but across the nation. And
this is one of those things where I do believe that Georgia will win, but I do have respect for Ohio State. This is not going to be a situation for me where, I stand up and say, oh, Ohio State's got no shot here. This is one of those games that Georgia, like I said, I believe they will win, but I do believe that Georgia needs to play well to win. And I think that, the next few weeks are kind of talking about what exactly that means, but this is definitely the kind of battle you would expect to see in a national semifinal, where you look across the field and you ought to have some respect for your opponent. I believe you can respect your opponent while also believing that you've got special characteristics that make your team more likely to win. And I think in both these instances, that's the truth. Ohio State is a good team. It is a worthy playoff entrant, I believe. But it's also a game in which Georgia can lean on what it does well. And some of what Georgia does well are areas in which Ohio State isn't quite as strong. And that, I hope and believe, will be the difference in the ballgame. How about an early evaluation from you, John, of what to expect from these two teams on the field?
Yeah, I think the timing comes at a really good time for Georgia in that our defensive backs didn't have their best game against LSU. And so you can spend this month in preparation saying, hey, we've got a lot of work to do, and we're going to need it. I mean, you're getting ready for Ohio State, and they can sling the rock. And I think if you come in with undue confidence, then maybe you get exposed. But when you just allow 500 yards to LSU through the air and you're going, maybe we have some work to do. I think that's a good situation for Georgia, and here's the reason why. We've got talent. And anytime you've got talent and you can motivate that talent, then when you have one of those performances and you're preparing for one of those threats, which I think that's the biggest threat for Georgia in this scenario is how do they respond and prepare for this aspect of Ohio State, then you got time and you got talent and you've got motivation. That's a good combo of three things right there as they get ready for this matchup.
You used the word motivation. Let me ask you the other side of this. Ohio State's hearing a lot of negative things about themselves right now. I think Georgia fans kind of have this picture of the national media who's kind of constantly inflating Ohio State, and there's probably some of that goes on. I think at times we've even been critical of some of that when we've seen it. But there's also this, the closer you get to Columbus, the more you hear Ohio State kind of lost to Michigan in a similar fashion 2 years in a row, where they just didn't seem to match whatever tenacity and toughness Michigan seemed to have. And boy, the Buckeyes are going to hear that for a month here right now, leading this game against Georgia, because Georgia, obviously, if you think Michigan's tough, Georgia's sort of viewed to be that on steroids in a way. How much do you expect Ohio State to kind of come out with an additional level of motivation, knowing that within their own program, within their own fan base even from some respects, they're getting a level of criticism because 2 years in a row they've lost to Michigan in a fashion that certainly did not please Buckeye Nation very much.
Well, it's the same motivating factor that our defensive backs are facing is, hey, you just gave up all these yards, and what are you going to do? Well, for Ringo and the rest of that group, they're going to take that personal. In the same fashion that Ohio State's going to take it personal, they got manhandled again. And are facing a Georgia team that I would describe Michigan as Georgia light, right? I mean, they're trying to build their program in a similar way, balanced offensive, defensively. We're going to play physical. We're going to mix things up and do play action pass, and they're not quite to the level of development as a program that Georgia is, and I think that was evident last year. So for Ohio State, they're looking at this and saying, okay, we're going to play big boy ball. We certainly didn't answer that bell against Michigan, and we're going up against an opponent that is more complete and does what Michigan does, in my opinion, better. So it's going to be a real challenge for them and motivating factor, similar to if and when we play Michigan. They're going to feel that same strain of that level of physicality that Ohio State struggled with against Michigan. They're going to have to step that up, and it very well could be the same case in the national championship game if Georgia and Michigan advance and face each other once again there.
And you mentioned this a couple of times. I want to make sure I respond to this. Obviously the Georgia defensive secondary did not have a good day against LSU, and to me, John, that's just a reminder of the fact that This is why Georgia doesn't play 50 to 30 games on a regular basis. Frankly, that wasn't as much fun as I think some Georgia fans kind of thought it would be to go out there and sort of play the same brand of football that so much of the rest of the country plays. That's what the SEC championship sort of turned into. But I don't believe 50 to 30 is the recipe for how you beat Ohio State. To me, it's the same thing it always is. You got to be in the 30s. You got to keep your opponent below that, somewhere in the 20s, something like that, 30-something to 20-something. That if it's 50 to 30, if that's the kind of game you're trying to win for the Peach Bowl, that you might end up being kind of disappointed. To me, the SEC championship was a reminder of why Georgia has mostly tried to avoid those kinds of games. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, isn't it funny how Georgia's defense, instead of circling in on one position group like I've done so far, Georgia's defense allowed 30 points. I mean, that in and of itself is an anomaly because of the level that they played, but yet they still win by 3 scores. And I think that just speaks to the complete nature of Georgia's football team. They are capable of scoring 50 points on a week-in, week-out basis. But what happened that was unique to this one game and not to the season is they allowed an opponent to move the ball up and down the field and score points. That's something that Georgia fans are not used to. For 2 seasons, last season and this season, it's a defensive performance that is suffocating. And when LSU found the success, even second half with a backup quarterback, you look out there and say, wow, is this what Georgia's all about? And the answer is no. It was unique. And I think that's a testament, really, to the level of play that Georgia's had this year. And I don't expect that to become commonplace in these next 2 games or ever, really, with Georgia, just because of, 1, the amount of talent, and 2, the way they play the game. The reliance on one another, and I think there was some breakdowns if you go back and watch the film, which I did, total football nerd, to see where these things are. And it's individual performances where you're relying on your teammate to fill in the blank there, but help over the top, or based on this coverage that we're expecting to get home sooner. All those things have to come into play, or else you look at the end of the day and you allow a team to find success where they otherwise wouldn't. And I think that is the anomaly. I think Georgia is actually excited about the opportunity to show that what happened against LSU is and should not be expected on a week-in, week-out basis. And even when you go up against a talented Ohio State team, this Georgia defense, I'm sure, is going to be more than prepared for when that opportunity comes.
John, great stuff. Thank you for being here today on DawgNation Daily, presented by Pella Window and Door of Georgia. It's fun to get a chance to talk to you again. We haven't done this in a while, so I was happy to do that. I'm looking forward to getting more deeply into this game with you over the course of the next couple of weeks, so hope you continue to enjoy your Christmas season here, and we'll look forward to getting a chance to chat with you very soon.
And always enjoy it, B.A. Thanks for having me on.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
Yeah, we've got a lot to say about this Georgia-Ohio State game as you get closer to it, and I think John does a good job of setting the stage for all that right now. So fun to have him back, kind of fun to be back in our normal format again, and great, of course, to have all of you with us there as well. In fact, let's get ready to go cruise around the SEC, courtesy of Royal Caribbean. A lot of you know the reason why we were pre-recorded some last week was because of my Royal Caribbean cruise vacation. Short getaway for us. It was kind of a special thing that Royal Caribbean invited me to be a part of. You've heard me talk about Wonder of the Seas before. Wonder of the Seas right now is the largest cruise ship in the world, and it's taking a new home in Port Canaveral, so I was invited to be a part of that. And I was reminded this week about why it is these kinds of cruise vacations so much fun for me. So one of the nights that we were there's a brand new specialty restaurant on board the Wonder of the Seas called the Mason Jar, and it's a southern themed restaurant, so you're talking about like fried chicken and barbecue, and my wife had like fried green tomatoes, I had some gumbo, so it's that kind of thing. But there's also kind of a really cool bar connected to the restaurant where they have a country music live band that's playing. And so here's the way the night kind of goes for us. We go have dinner at this restaurant, just the two of us, and we're done. We kind of stumbled out of the restaurant, and a couple of the folks that we had known on the cruise, or some of our friends, were there in the bar listening to the country music band playing. We hung out with them and kind of had some cocktails, and then there was another band, a rock band, playing in a different venue. We kind of went over and saw that as well and kind of finished our night doing that. And here's the thing. It's like when you get to be like my wife and I, we have kids and we're busy lives and things like that. These are the kinds of experiences we just don't get a lot when we're not on a cruise vacation, because our weeks at home are just very, very busy. As many of you who are kind of, running your own family, you kind of understand what that feels like. So the cruise vacation for us is a chance to kind of get away and be different people on that particular week. We're the kinds of people who do stay up late and go do all this stuff and have all this fun. The kind of thing that on a regular basis we just don't get to do maybe as much as we did prior to having kids, which we obviously love our family, but it's also kind of nice to have that moment which you kind of get away and experience a level of excitement that the daily life just doesn't always provide. And so that's what Wonder of the Seas was for us last week. And it's a reminder to me about how much fun the upcoming DawgNation crew is going to be there as well. So our good buddy Jessica Slater, who, by the way, was on board this ship with us, Jessica is ready to talk to you about this here right now. In fact, she and I were talking about some of the conversations that she's already been having with dog fans and DawgNation Daily listeners and viewers who've already kind of booked their cruise and those who are kind of finalizing it to get that ready to get done. The big push to get all this done is right now. So if you've kind of taken that first step but haven't taken the final step, now is the time to do it. 770-718-9147. That's the phone number you can dial for her, 770-718-9147. You can also visit the website royaldogs.com to find out more about the DawgNation cruise. But honestly, based on the experience we had on Wonder of the Seas this past week, I would tell you that if you need a getaway, this is, and the honest truth is you probably do, there really is no better getaway for all the fun things than what a Royal Caribbean cruise vacation has to offer. I can say that sincerely because we certainly enjoyed that. And it's never easy to go from a fun topic to a serious topic, but I do want to address right now the situation with Mississippi State coach Mike Leach. And look, we don't know a ton right now other than he's in a very critical condition and has had to be hospitalized, and this is a very scary thing. I was mentioning to some of our video audience a little bit before. The weekend for me is busy as is for like a lot of you, and you're kind of doing a bunch of family stuff, and sometimes the news, I try to follow it as closely as I can, but sometimes it kind of goes in one ear and out the other, and I don't think I fully appreciated just how serious the Leach situation was until relatively late last night, where it finally became clear to me that, gosh, this is a guy that right now appears to be fighting for his life. And I don't know all the details as to why, but that appears to be the case. And by the time many of you hear the show, like 99% of the folks who consume our show do it kind of after the fact, well after it airs live. So you may know more about this later on than we know right now, but all we know at the moment is we've been asked to pray. I've seen across SEC country those requests sincerely answered here. Myself, I'm also praying for Coach Leach too. Just incredibly scary situation. It reminds all of us how fragile life can kind of be. And I will tell you this, I was in Starkville for the first time this year a few weeks ago when Georgia played there. And I think there's this tendency from the outside looking in to assume that the SEC is just like all the same across the board. But many of you who travel around a lot know how different that can actually be. Is that a place like Georgia is this massive thing. The state of Georgia is very big, huge population. The University of Georgia is this very big thing representing that state, and Georgia football is this gigantic entity on its own. And I think when you travel around other places, you realize, other schools kind of have a little bit more of a quaint feel to them. And I'm just going to be honest with you, there is a family vibe around a place like Mississippi State that I don't know exists in other places in the SEC, because a lot of other places in the SEC are just so dadgum large. And they're almost bigger than professional sports in some ways. At least they kind of give off the feel of that. But at a place like Mississippi State, that's not exactly how it feels. And I got to tell you, I really liked what I experienced in Starkville. I liked their fans. Honestly, I don't know what I was expecting, but their fans were actually pretty cool. And they clearly have a bond with each other. It's almost like when you're a lot smaller than your competitors, you kind of take on this, I don't know, there's a certain closeness they seem to craft with each other on the basis of the fact that they are like the little team trying to fight against all these really big teams, these big programs out there. And so there's already this kind of cool, I guess, family vibe that sort of exists around a program like Mississippi State. I have to say I was kind of impressed by that. When I visited there a few weeks ago, as cold as it was, they were, they just seemed like they were all enjoying each other's company a little bit, which was kind of nice to see. So they will clearly, throughout all of this, be called upon to really lean on that close connection they have with each other. So to our friends in Starkville, to the family and those who know, Coach Leach closely, we really are. We're praying for you. This is a scary situation. We are desperate to hear some good news on this, and we'll just be here to talk about whatever does come next in this story right now. Very few facts, but we certainly know that he's in a very serious medical situation, so our prayers for him indeed on that. Transitioning back kind of the normal topic of football, I think quietly what's been going on at Auburn the last few days is kind of interesting. I believe these hires are now official. They've been reports, but I believe now they are official. Auburn has hired 2 coordinators. Now, Hugh Freeze is a very offensive-minded head coach, so his influence on the offense is going to be obviously huge. But Philip Montgomery, the former Tulsa coach, who was also offensive coordinator at one point in time at Baylor, that's a pretty big hire by Auburn. That's bringing in a guy that's got a good level of offensive expertise. I think this is a pretty serious hire by Freeze here with the Tigers to kind of get this in place. And similarly, bringing a guy like Ron Roberts, who had been at Baylor, working with Dave Aranda. Once again, Aranda's a defensive-minded head coach, but Roberts, I think had earned some respect with what he had done there with the Bears. Once again, this is a pretty big-time hire for Auburn. And maybe the biggest part of all this is that, Barry Odom has left Arkansas to go be UNLV head coach. I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing for Arkansas right now. I wasn't all impressed with Odom's work with that defense here this year. But in trying to replace Odom, Arkansas had kind of reached out to Roberts as well. So this is a little bit of a head-to-head battle between Arkansas and Auburn to get Roberts, and Auburn ends up winning that. So the bottom line for me on this is that I think you have to start looking at Auburn as being a different kind of program than it has been at the end of the Gus Malzahn era and through the 2 years of the Brian Harsin era, where Auburn was really making almost no noise at all. I think you have to start assuming that Auburn's going to start making a little bit more noise. And this may not matter for Georgia very much right now because Georgia is so far ahead of the rest of the SEC, but I believe it will matter for teams like Florida and Tennessee and South Carolina and these other programs that have their own kind of reboots going on. And at Florida, they're a year ahead of the Hugh Freeze era here at Auburn. For Josh Heupel, kind of the 2 years ahead now, and Shane Beamer kind of the same way. But we're about to, within the next couple of years, enter into a divisionless version of the SEC. And a lot of what Auburn has been judged on in recent years has been kind of judged based on how their position has been in a very tough SEC West. But pretty soon, you're going to start making these comparisons more between not just the other teams in the SEC West, but other teams kind of across the college football landscape here right now. And I'm not quite so sure that Auburn isn't pretty well positioned, even though Heupel's gotten an earlier start and had the success this year, and obviously there's a little bit of noise around Billy Napier at Florida right now. I'm not quite so sure that Auburn won't find itself just as well positioned as any of those other teams are as they try to make some moves towards the true contenders and competitors in the SEC, the likes of Georgia and what has been Alabama. I think what Auburn's doing here right now, these are pretty sizable moves, I would say. And let me also kind of add to this, just while we're on the subject of coordinators here for a moment, that Liam Cohen coming back to Kentucky as offensive coordinator, I think this is a pretty big deal. The Rich Scangarello era was obviously a huge failure. They had brought in Scangarello to kind of run Liam Cohen's offense. That didn't work. There's been some chatter about Sean McVay with the LA Rams about whatever's going on with him, that he may not be kind of a long-term guy there. So that potentially opened up the door for Cohen to come back to the SEC. But Kentucky needing a coordinator and rehiring the guy that had been successful for them in 2021, I think is a pretty big deal. And this wasn't on our rundown either, but I did want to at least mention this too. The rumors of Texas A&M hiring Bobby Petrino are both hilarious, but also you have to say that's a pretty big-time hire for a guy like Jimbo Fisher, who a lot of folks wondered would he ever really relinquish control of the offense. If you bring in a guy like Petrino, you're bringing in the kind of coach that you feel like you could potentially trust. Now, Petrino's got all kinds of baggage, and it's kind of an embarrassing, press conference type deal, just given his previous history in the SEC. It's also an example of whatever the most interesting thing that could happen is in the SEC is likely maybe the thing that will happen. But nonetheless, some of these coordinator stories here right now around the league are pretty interesting. I wanted to mention the Auburn stuff, but I'll kind of also add to that Cohen going back to Kentucky and the possibility of Petrino coming to Texas A&M. Both those are fairly sizable moves, too, if they do indeed happen. And then I'll also mention this former Georgia player and staffer here and a guy that's gotten a lot of attention on the recruiting trail the last little bit. Nick Williams is heading to Colorado to be a part of Deion Sanders' staff. And so this is an example of Sanders is very serious about building something real at Colorado. And I told you this on one of our pre-recorded shows, is that ultimately what Dion really is an icon of the late 80s and early 90s. That's when Dion became famous. And a lot of the stuff that you kind of see with Dion, even in the sort of modern, video stuff, some of what he kind of looks like is some of that throwback to what once made him, famous back in the late 80s and the 90s. He was just sort of a cultural force back in that time that went beyond just merely being a Major League Baseball player, an NFL player, or what he was at Florida State. He had sort of a cultural relevance that kind of went beyond that. And around that same time, Colorado was kind of cool too. This is back when Bill McCartney was head coach, and you had Darian Hagan at quarterback, you had Eric Bieniemy at running back. Later on, it kind of turned into Cordell Stewart. Eventually became Rashawn Salam. But Colorado had a little bit of a coolness going on back then as well. And so it would not surprise me at all to see Dion kind of lean back to that sort of nostalgic feeling as you try to resurrect what Colorado has not been in quite some time. And obviously they're going to be very serious about putting a good staff together. Nick Williams is the latest example of that, but you've had other kind of big-time announcements kind of coming here too on the Colorado part of all of this. So I think the Dion time in Boulder is going to be very interesting. A lot of folks thought that maybe Dion would be better taking a different job. I certainly think that he has a chance to kind of resurrect some good vibes again around Colorado. It seems like already a lot of that's kind of happening. So seeing what happens next for Dion, I think, is going to be interesting. And obviously hiring a guy like Nick Williams is a pretty big deal to go along with some other hires they've made. So we'll make that cruising around the SEC, courtesy of Royal Caribbean. And here for a moment before we wrap things up, I also want to give you a couple thoughts on where things stand with Georgia recruiting right now. We're heading towards the start of the early signing period for the class of 2023 on December 21st. But right now, when it comes to stuff with Georgia, that is far from the only thing that's going on. You may have seen over the weekend that Ra Thomas, the Mississippi State wide receiver in the transfer portal, he showed some photos of himself in Athens, Georgia, kind of signifying that he's taking a visit right now. That also would signify to us that Georgia plans on being a pretty significant player in the transfer portal. Georgia's never going to take as many transfers as some programs do. Frankly, Georgia doesn't have room to take as many transfers as some programs do, and Georgia recruits too well at the high school level, long-term type relationships to be, leaning too much in the direction of these sort of short-term quick fixes like the portal. But if you can get better, you want to, and maybe Georgia sees the opportunity to get better at the receiver position. So that is one of the things that's going on right now. I'll also tell you this, and I'm sure many of you kind of thought the same thing. Georgia adding the 2025 linebacker Jaden Perlotti from Buford is also, I think, a really interesting thing to pay attention to here, because many of you are aware that this has been one of those areas which Georgia has probably not had the same level of recruiting success as it has had in other places, other areas with other types of players. Georgia has not recruited the county of Gwinnett particularly well. And Buford in particular, you just have not seen a lot of big-time guys going to Buford. In fact, all of this was resurrected once again when Justice Haynes made his pledge to Alabama a few months ago. Well, now here we are near the end of the cycle, and you're left to wonder, well, maybe Georgia's still in it for Justice Haynes. I know Jeff Sintel's got a story coming up on that at DawgNation.com, which will find out more about the Georgia and Haynes situation. But I think with Perlotti committing to Georgia, even though it's a class of 25 guy and a couple of years away from that being, an actual player in the Georgia roster, I think it is a little bit of an indication that whatever you thought may have been going on between, say, Georgia and Buford in the past, Buford, one of the flagship programs here in Georgia when it comes to an overall talent level, whatever you thought may have been going on in the past, there may be evidence that a lot of that is changing, not just with a guy like Haynes, the class of 2023, but Buford, when you think about what they have in the class of 2024, King Joseph Edwards and KJ Bolden and Edric Houston, and I mean, maybe Houston more so than anybody else. He may be as much of a want list type player for Georgia as anybody has been, just given the way he kind of reminds you of Trayvon Walker a little bit right now. But the point is that a lot of big-time recruiting battles are coming up that have a little bit of a Buford flair to them. And in the past, you're left to say, well, Georgia's got a disadvantage when it goes up for one of these Buford players for whatever reason. With Perlotti making his commitment, that might be foreshadowing that whether it be down the stretch with Haynes here for the class of 2023 or looking ahead to the next cycle in the class of 2024, big battles involving players from Buford, that Georgia may be just as in these as anybody else is, and that whatever perceived disadvantage Georgia has for these recruiting fights so close to home, that just may not be true anymore. The Perlotti decision may be the indication that you need about that. All right, so to wrap things up here today, let's get ready to do so with a great collection of golden shoes. As you might imagine, a lot of these kind of floating around over the course of the last weekend or so on the basis of Stetson Bennett. A lot of folks having some fun. So let's throw the first one up here. Joshua Campbell shares this. Hashtag go for 2 in 22. Showing you the old photo of Bennett against Auburn. I guess this is going back to the early part of the 2021 season. Kind of giving almost the Heisman pose there. It does look a lot like the Heisman pose. A lot of folks kind of pointing that out. So Joshua Campbell will give you a golden shoe for showing us that and using the hashtag go for 2 in 22. Jeff Doak also says that the Don Juan Pond is a hypersaline lake in Victoria Land, Antarctica. It's recognized as the saltiest place on Earth. A close second is the collective Twitter feeds of Hendon Hooker fans since the Heisman finalists were announced. That's also very funny as well. Jeff will give you a golden shoe for that too. Jay Green showing us all of the Kirby Smart Revenge Tour games, going back and getting that vengeance against the last loss that have happened during the Kirby Smart era, LSU being the latest example of that. And he says, to be determined, Ole Miss one of these days, Texas one of these days. But yeah, Kirby's been very good at avenging those losses. He hasn't had many of them, but when he has taken one, they've gone out and gotten revenge for that again. LSU, the latest example of that. Jay Green, that is very, very good stuff from you. Golden shoe to you as well. I love this from our buddy Bubba, who shows off his elves on the shelf, who say, our elves have spoken, hashtag go for 2 in 22, and you see them with the national championship trophy, and the note that the elves have written here says, we want another one. Listen, I love it when the elf on the shelf is a college football fan and a dog fan indeed, so that is great. Good to see the elves getting involved here. Maybe a little bit of that magic is what Georgia needs to bring home another national championship. Really good stuff. Also, another great Georgia fan kind of showing off the Heisman Trophy, and they've kind of used the Stetson Bennett. This is I can't see the username here, but they have go for 2 in 22 in their username, which is really fun. And then you've got the Heisman Trophy with the Stetson Bennett photo here. So that's really, really good stuff. A golden shoe going out there as well. That's a great one. Then Chelsea Shadowin sent this to us. She said, I went to our first Army-Navy game yesterday. Truly an incredible experience. So much pride and patriotism, and yet I still wore my hat supporting our Heisman finalist, Stetson Bennett IV. All day long, go Dogs. And she says, hashtag golden shoe. Chelsea's a great dog fan. Great to see them out there enjoying what is just an unbelievable showcase of college football and patriotism for the Army-Navy game. And then the mailman hat looking great on Chelsea there too. We'll give her a golden shoe as well. So great collection of those here this week. And also a great way to wrap up our show with our Gator Hater Countdown, reminding all of you that business to be taken care of here right now and go for 2 in 22 season. But after that, you start turning your attention to 2023. And before you know it, back in Jacksonville, beating up on those lousy, stinking Gators once again. In fact, we'll all do that together 320 days from right now. That is our Gator Hater Countdown. We appreciate all of you being with us today. Go for 2 in 22, and we'll see you back here tomorrow for DawgNation Daily, presented by Pella, Window and Door of Georgia. And on video, time now for the R.S. Andrews Cool Down. Good to have you with us. So thankful to be back doing all of this again, and so glad to have all of you with us as we do. And glad to have R.S. Andrews with us as well for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, and electric needs. They will show up on time, do the work that's promised, the price that's promised. You can trust all of them on that. So let's go Facebook first today, and we'll roll through there and just get a bunch of comments. And hopefully everybody's doing great and having a good time. And I hope you enjoyed the show today. All right, let's see what's going on. On Facebook. Always takes me a second to pull it up, but we'll get rolling here in a moment. All right, here we go. Keith Folds giving the and on video. Yeah, glad to be doing that again. Oh, I like this. Craig Jones says, instead of saying I told you so, Bennett's going to say I showed you so with the second national championship. That's great. That's great. Bill Sanders says now the real show can start. Well, Bill, I'm glad to have you here for it, for sure. Ryan Walker says, I was hanging with Danny Cannell in Philly at the Army-Navy game. Let me read this comment from Ryan. He says, I have picks for you, and I got a surprise for you. And the guys, I created something special for DawgNation. You guys allowed me to come on, and I appreciate it. So just know you and the DawgNation fam have a customized shirt. Wow. You know, Ryan Walker's very talented at making these customized shirts. Very talented. He says that I created so when you allow us to go live as fans again, I'll definitely wear it for you guys. Okay, so let's find a way to do that soon, Ryan. We need to get going on that. Let me figure out when we can do another call-in show because I'd love to see that. Always love your commentary, so we'll do that soon, Ryan. Let me see if I can figure out when we're going to. Bill Kelly says, if we can't flip Haynes, do we go to the transfer portal? I guess it's always a possibility. You also kind of point out that Roderick Robinson had an unbelievable conclusion to his high school career, so congratulations to him for that. That's another Georgia running back of the future to feel good about right now. But I would say that anything is possible as a mechanism for whatever you don't feel like you get in the class of 2023. You can certainly use the portal to kind of fill in any of those holes, and maybe running back included. David Hoke says, great C.J. Stroud quote about Stetson Bennett, but also a great quote in general. A lot of people don't believe in you. They tell you that you're crazy and that your dreams probably won't work out. But to be honest, if people aren't telling you that, your dreams aren't big enough. That is really true. I mean, no doubt that's true. No doubt that's true. And there is an aspect of, I think, great players in sports understand a part of this in a way that most of us never will. We'll just never get a chance to really appreciate how true that is that the population of people who are athletically capable of achieving in sports is actually greater than the number of people that do. And that in the category of, well, here's someone who's athletically capable, how do you determine the winners and losers from within that group alone? It is the people that can just sort of process the self-doubt or the lack of belief, the public telling you that you don't belong there. I mean, some of us, if we get any kind of criticism whatsoever, all of a sudden we're just kind of wrecked. Well, if you're an athlete, you're facing all of that all the time. And those that can process that well, someone like C.J. Stroud, someone like Stetson Bennett, are just more set up to succeed in life. It's just true. You're absolutely right about that. Mark Brown says, is there an SEC award for a best player, SEC Player of the Year? I believe that Hendon Hooker did win Player of the Year, I think. So, yes, there is an SEC Player of the Year, and I believe that Hooker did win that. Let's see what else. Joseph Kennedy says, when I see Ryan Day's beard, it makes me think of fresh tar being put on I-85. Yeah, he definitely kind of has that traditional. There's this thing now where, like, all of the supposedly smart coaches in the NFL are all these kind of young guys with a stubble beard. You know, Ryan Day clearly kind of brings some of that persona to the table, and I think that's one of the reasons why he's so universally lauded as this great coach in college football, because he sort of looks the part of what has kind of been turned in sort of the modern day image of the really good football coach. You know, it used to be that football coaches kind of look like Army generals. Well, now, I mean, if you want to know what I honestly believe, here's what I'll tell you, is that there are a lot of media types that were tormented by their high school PE teachers, and so therefore they like coaches that don't remind them of their high school PE teachers. And so that's where, like, the Ryan Days and the Cliff Kingsburys, that's where some of that comes to play, because they look a little bit more like sort of like tech moguls than they do traditional football coaches. And there's an aspect of certain, silo of the media that kind of likes the idea of building a new architect, sort of archetype is really what I'm looking for. Sort of a new archetype for coaches, because the old archetype for coaches brings up bad memory for them. And so I think that's kind of what goes on with Ryan Day. All right, let me go to YouTube for a minute. All right, on YouTube, James K says, glad to have you back with us live. Go for 2 and 22. And he talked of a Peach Bowl tailgate for DawgNation. I would have loved to have done one. The trick is that the turnaround between December and the actual game is just kind of short. And so there's a huge commitment required to do something like that, the scale that we do it. And so unfortunately, we're just not going to be able to. But I would love to have done it. It's just always really tricky with how the college football playoff kind of comes in December at a time which a lot of other things are going on, which makes that a little bit difficult. Green Soldier says, if we don't have a 75-25 ratio of fans at Mercedes-Benz Stadium, I'm going to lose my mind. I think the biggest thing to deal with there is that, and I think I'll tell you this. There have been some very disappointed people around Georgia, because the cutoff, I've been told, for tickets for the game was like 100,000. 100,000 points is what was required to get the tickets for the Peach Bowl. Very, very, very disappointed folks. And so what you have is, if I understand correctly, so for every big game, you have an allotment goes to the one school, an allotment goes to the other school, and then there's the allotment that the bowl itself kind of holds on to. And the Peach Bowl likes to sell a good number of its own tickets, just kind of general admission, not general admission, but just sort of general on sale throughout the year. And so what my understanding is that, only a small portion of the overall tickets go to the actual schools themselves. It's not like it's half the stadium. It's a portion of that. And if you're comparing it, like say, to the SEC championship, Georgia gets less of an allotment for the Peach Bowl than it does for the SEC championship. And so if you're saying it's going to be 75-25, then you're talking about really infiltrating that kind of ticket space that's just sort of up for grabs. And the honest truth is that, obviously was something that Georgia will do. But a lot of this is going to have to be done via the secondary market because the Peach Bowl has been sold out now for many months. It's not like the regular tickets got scarfed up once it was found out who the teams were. You had a lot of folks buying those tickets prior to there being any indication who the teams are going to be. So if it's going to be a huge imbalance in favor of Georgia, you're going to have to really do some heavy work in the secondary market for that to be the case. And here's what my concern is. I mentioned this, I believe, on Thursday's show. I do want this to be a big home field advantage for Georgia, the same way that you just said yourself, Green Soldier. But my fear is it's not Ohio State fans getting the building. It's kind of like the Rob Lowe wearing the NFL hat in the building. It's like regular rich guy, regular sort of person who just wants to be wherever the hot thing is. And right now, Georgia, Ohio State is the hot ticket. That, like, my fear, my concern is that how many of these tickets are going to be held on to, almost like you think of it for a Super Bowl, how many of these tickets are going to be held on to by some sort of corporate type that's just going to sit on his hands or her hands and, not make the kind of noise that you really need in a game like this. I hope this feels like a football game. I would say that last year's national championship between Georgia and Alabama did feel like a football game. For the most part, you didn't have a ton of corporate, antiseptic type stuff in there. You had two big fan bases who were there to make a lot of noise and treat this like a real football game. I hope that's the way this game feels as well, but you have to be a little bit concerned of, just given how many of the tickets are under the control of the bowl, how many of the real fans get a chance to be there. I hope it's a lot, but you're going to have to dig deep to be there because the tickets, I'm guessing, are pretty expensive. And a lot of folks that I know who thought they were getting it from Georgia found out that they weren't, and now all of a sudden those folks are flooding the market there as well, which means the price of the tickets is going to keep going up. Cassie Turner says this needs to not feel corporate. It's a bowl game, for crying out loud. And Cassie, I'm right there with you, but the problem is like sometimes that's just what you get. Now, hopefully for Georgia that's not going to be the case, but a lot of people who end up getting access to these tickets are not even fans of either team. They are literally, like I said, Rob Lowe in the NFL hat. It's just, somebody who wants to be wherever the big moment is. If you go to, for some of you who are big NFL fans, you kind of know this about the Super Bowl. Oftentimes the Super Bowl does not have the big game feel that an NFC or an AFC championship game would have because a lot of the real fans are priced out of that. I really hope that's not the case here. I hope the real fans are not priced out of all of this. Let's see what else. Let's Go Brandon says it's really hard to win 2 natties in a row, much less 3, but 100% have UGA going 12-0 in the regular season again next season. I don't see why you would say they are expected to take a dramatic step back really in any area. I don't see that. They'll obviously be inexperienced at quarterback, but there's no obvious reason that Georgia should take a big step back next year. No, I think that's right. Buddy Lee Z says, what was my favorite game this year other than Tennessee? It's a good question. It'd be easy to say the SEC championship because Georgia had not won that in a while. Let me try to give you a good answer, though. Maybe South Carolina. Going on the road and dismantling if you're not letting me say Tennessee, going on the road and dismantling South Carolina to the degree to which Georgia did was pretty awesome. And later on, seeing how effective Gamecocks were against Tennessee and Clemson makes the Georgia win seem even more impressive. So If you won't let me say Tennessee, and if it's too easy to say the SEC championship, I'll tell you what Georgia did on the road at South Carolina was really pretty impressive. Jake Shipe said to Jimbo Fisher, thank you for attending this fundraiser that brought him 2 5 stars last week. No, I didn't get my thanks for that, Jay. I did not get my thanks for that. Oh, yeah, so Mark Cameron. So we had a little stopover before the cruise last week, and I bumped into Mark Cameron. It was great to see you, Mark. That was fun. Always, you never know we're going to see dog fans. Dog fans just all over the place. So fun little get-together. Bumped into Mark last week, talked a little Georgia football there for a moment, so that was great to see. Always nice to see dog fans and their families out having a good time, and that was a lot of fun. Foster Moss, also on the subject of Cedar Grove. Yeah, they got robbed, and that was not good. Not good. And what you may or may not be aware of is there are some neighboring states that do have replay. Alabama, for instance, has replay. And, you know, to see a call so incorrect, and listen, maybe Sandy Creek scores in the very next play and they win the game because of that, which would have been fine. You just hate to see the game be concluded on a call the likes of which that it was for Cedar Grove team that's really, really good. And, you know, SportsCenter picked this up. First of all, I was shocked at how much national news this became because it was a bad call, but maybe just not as much going on this particular day. The story got more and more and more attention. It was tough to see. It was tough to see. And it was not a great look for our state, unfortunately. You can't help but say that. Zebulon Owen. Y'all are funny. Y'all crack me up. Let's see what else. Frank Patterson says, what was the better atmosphere, the Rose Bowl victory or destroying Tennessee at home when they were number 1 this year? Nothing for me rivals what I experienced when it comes to that Tennessee game. That was just amazing. And for whatever reason, so much of like the really cool moments in Georgia history have taken place somewhere else other than Athens. And so to have this moment be in the stadium, in Sanford Stadium, made it the more special. Now, I will say the time around the Rose Bowl was obviously amazing. It really was. So many Georgia fans traveled out there to be a part of that. And Oklahoma fans were good too. They were there to support their team as well. So that was kind of an unforgettable moment. But that game against Tennessee was really something, which kind of leads me to believe, what were like the most amazing moments here? I mean, I will tell you that the thing of this Kirby Smart era, one of the memories that I have that sticks out maybe more than anything else is if you go back to the game against Notre Dame in 2017. It was actually not being in South Bend, although that was beyond insane. To be at that Cubs game on the Friday night before the Georgia-Notre Dame game in 2017 and to see 20-something thousand Georgia fans in Wrigley Field for a game between, like, say, the Cubs and it's like the Brewers or something. I mean, it's like could not have any less connection to Georgia at all. And Georgia fans were there kind of calling the dogs and doing the Georgia and then the Bulldogs. That was the most remarkable moment, I believe, of all these great kind of fan experiences that we've all had over the last few years, those of us who've been lucky enough to travel to some of these things. The number of Georgia fans who were at that game in Wrigley Field was amazing. And then one more I'll add to this. And it ends up only being a footnote because of the fact that Georgia lost the game. But the number of Georgia fans that traveled to LSU in 2018, we'll never remember this because Georgia played awful that day and got killed. But it still doesn't change the fact there were, I swear to you, at least 20,000 Georgia fans in LSU. That's a long way to travel for a game like that. There were Georgia fans all over the place prior to that game. It was, and we did a DawgNation invasion, so obviously we brought a good number of them ourselves. But still, we didn't bring all of them. That's 20-something thousand Georgia fans were there for that. It doesn't matter because Georgia got blasted. But, man, there were so many Georgia fans that day. So many Georgia fans. JJ said, I saw a Michigan fan say TCU didn't belong in the playoffs. Bama did. Well, he better be careful because he's about to find out whether TCU belongs or not here pretty soon. Let's Go Brandon says UGA fans don't travel. They invade. That's about right. That's about right. Scott Harris says the pure joy in the stadium when Ringo intercepted, it was incredible. It was, and I'll tell you this about that fourth quarter. So that game kind of always felt like a football game, but by the fourth quarter, it felt like a actual Georgia football game because here's what happened. So when Georgia took the lead after the Mitchell touchdown, when Georgia went back on defense, I mean, you had a level of noise that made you feel like you were in Sanford Stadium because, honestly, you don't get as much of that for these neutral site games. You just don't get as much of that. It's just sort of hard to have that feeling. But I get chills thinking about this. When Georgia took the lead in the fourth quarter, the level of fan response to that was, we are now, whatever it was, 9 minutes, 10 minutes, however long, we are now this close to a national championship, and we're going to bring this thing home. And the fans got so into it. So you're right. The celebration for the Ringo interception was the culmination of all that. But the thing being in the stadium I remember so intently was the way in which everybody started making a bunch of noise on defense once Georgia retook that lead. That was a really special thing, a very special thing. Cassie Turner said, I've never heard people so loud for winning a coin toss. Cassie, that's a good memory too. That's really cool. Let's see what else. Buddy Leezy says, if Stetson Bennett wins this year's championship, does he surpass Herschel Walker? No, I don't believe that he does. And with all due respect to Stetson Bennett, Herschel Walker, I think, is still the unquestioned best player ever. George, I believe, is the best player ever in college football. And here's as close to I'm ever going to come to making a political statement. Because Herschel has become a political figure, I think there's been this attempt to kind of rewrite him out of some of college football history, not because of political disagreements, but just because of the fact that people don't like political figures being such a big part of the college football story. And I don't care who you voted for. I think how you evaluate Herschel as a politician should be completely different than how you evaluate Herschel as a player. And so a few years ago when you had like the best college football players of all time, it was an absolute miscarriage of justice that Herschel wasn't number one on that list. He's the greatest player in the sport's history, I believe, and I don't believe it's particularly close. So now that the campaign is over, not only does this mean that the commercial's in, thankfully for those of you who are on YouTube or TV or wherever these things are always airing, but also, maybe now we can go back to, hopefully, I would say, fully appreciating who Herschel was as a player, because there's no doubt that he has been downgraded in the history books because he's become a political figure. No doubt that's the case. And I hope to see that corrected in the future. Let's see what else. See, here's to me the thing that made Herschel was the sport was so different back then, right? There's an element of surprise now with every single big play. Every single explosive play is kind of coming on the basis of, well, are they going to run it or are they going to throw it? Are they going to throw it here? Are they going to throw it there? There's some element of surprise, I would say, that's baked into all of the big explosive plays that happen in college football. But there was none of that when Herschel Walker was playing. Everybody in the stadium knew he was getting it every single time, and he still did what he did every single time. And you just can't change that. And when it comes to like the political part of this, you have a right to think whatever you want to think. I honestly don't care. I literally do not care. If you think he's the greatest thing that ever happened or the worst thing that ever happened, either side of that is your opinion is uninteresting to me. But the one thing that we are able to fairly evaluate here is what he was as a football player. And I don't think that's up for debate. I don't. Let's see what else. Jay Shipe says, dumbest comment ever. He thinks that Stetson's better than Herschel Walker. Yeah, I just can't go there. In fact, I don't even think that Stetson Bennett would go there on that because Stetson kind of knows the history. And I don't even think he would go there on that. But it's not a knock on Stetson Bennett to say he's not better than the greatest player of all time. That's not a knock on Bennett. Frederick Meredith says Georgia's going to control the semifinal versus Ohio State with a bruising, brawling offensive line and Jalen Carter. I'm right there with you on all of that. I believe if Georgia wins, that's the stuff required to win. You have to have a big day from your offensive line. Frankly, there have been moments this year when the Ohio State offensive line has not looked great. You've got to make them look that way in that game too, which, as you said, does mean a lot from Jalen Carter. it really is a line of scrimmage game. And that's one of the things we talked about in today's show is that with all the energy that exists around Bennett right now, and rightly so, that doesn't change what Georgia-Ohio State's going to be about. It's not going to be a referendum on Bennett, whether he should have won the award or whatever else. It's going to be about all of the facets of the Georgia program trying to go out there and be better than their counterpart on the other side for Ohio State, and a lot of that does rest on the line of scrimmage. All right, we're going to do 5 more minutes, then we're going to leave. Frank Patterson says, any word on Ladd and Warren? So I don't have anything new for you on that, and it's important to know we're not going to get a ton from Georgia on this. Is that Kirby will speak again on the 21st, almost certainly, and he'll probably do about half of that on the signing class and about half of that on the Peach Bowl. And so we'll get a new update from Kirby on McConkey and McClendon coming up on the 21st, but it's probably going to be what you kind of used to hear from Kirby. And then after that, we're not going to get anything from him again until the week of the game. So this is the thing about December. It is a little bit of radio silence. Georgia, and all the CFP teams do, but you kind of go underneath a rock for a bit. And so we'll hear from the coach coming up on signing day, or at least the start of the early signing period. And then we'll hear from him a good bit during game week. But we're not going to get anything from him this week. And so whatever's happening there is going to be behind closed doors. Let's see what else. Young Dre says, does Nolan Smith come back for a three-peat? Does he have a COVID year? First of all, I don't think that he does. But would he have a COVID year? I guess he could take one. Was he class of 19? So that's 19, 20, 21, 22. I guess he could use his COVID year. I don't think he will, but it would be kind of nice to think. Wildman Slayer says when Kirby was at Bama, they would lose defensive players every year, and I would think they would take a step back, but it didn't happen. Now it's happening in Georgia since Kirby took over. Wildman, you're absolutely right about that. And, I mean, this is kind of the thing that sort of a blowhard hype man like me would say. I don't think there's any doubt that the Georgia defense on paper next year stands to be better than it was this year. This may be Nick Saban's notorious rebuilding year for Georgia defensively. Now, they've been fine, but they are about to unleash talent along the edge in a way that this program just kind of hasn't had. A year older version of Mikael Williams, hopefully healthier, and year older version of Marvin Jones Jr. This is a program that really has a chance to maybe do it in a big way along the edge next year. That's going to change a lot here defensively. Maybe getting a guy like Damon Wilson involved or Sam Mpemba involved too would be a lot of fun. Let me go to DawgNation.com for a moment. Run him down says Stetson's by far the greatest player to ever lace him up at Georgia if they win another national championship. If anyone disagrees, he's just a hater. He should be the number 1 overall pick. So there you go. There you go. Let's see what else. Scott Bolin says, do you think that Bennett's statue worthy? Yes, that's a great question. Georgia is the most understatued program of them all. Herschel doesn't have one. I think that Bennett should get one. Look, I just love to see a lot more statues. And I don't know what criteria you make up to decide who gets a statue. But, yeah, would I like to see a Stetson Bennett statue at Georgia? Yes, I would. That's a great question, and yes, I would, Scott. That is. Especially if you win 2 national championships. Would I like to see Bennett get that? You better believe that I would. Scott Harris says Ryan Day is coaching for his reputation. An ugly loss could get ugly in Columbus. Scott, I believe that you may be right about that. That I think a lot of folks kind of thought that Day could put himself on the hot seat. So after he lost to Michigan this year, I think a lot of folks in Big Ten country would have told you that it would not have been a good idea for Day to lose to Michigan again next year. All of a sudden now, by virtue of being the college football playoff, the referendum that you thought might be coming next November actually comes right now, because if you lose to Georgia doing a lot of the same things that Michigan would do to you, in a place like Ohio State, that's not going to be good enough. It's not. So I don't think you're overstating this at all to say there is definitely a reputational stake for Ryan Day in this game. I don't think you're wrong to say that at all. At all. It sounds like a kind of a hot takey thing, but I think you're actually right. Dogs on Top says during the interviews for the Heisman Trophy ceremony, only one player truly showed honor to his mom by putting her in the seat of honor. True class. DGD, he gives you the 13 Heisman and the go for 2 and 22. Yeah, Dogs on Top. I thought that Bennett was a class act the entire weekend. I did. I really, really did. Scott Bolin also saying what a blessing it is to have all those recent games to remember. Notre Dame, Rose Bowl, SEC Championship, Orange Bowl, National Championship invasions, big home games, memorable plays. It is just so much fun. And for me, that's how I measure all of this, is I do measure it in those moments. Obviously, you'd like to put numbers on the wall and things like that, but there is an element to, as cliche as this sounds, like the journey is what this is. You know, the destination are the championships and the things like that. But the journey of what it felt like to travel to South Bend, what it felt like to travel to Pasadena, what it felt like to be in Athens for the Tennessee game this year, those are the feelings that kind of come back up. And when I'm, on the elliptical and I'm having a hard time getting through, that's the stuff I'm dialing up on YouTube as a way of kind of finally getting the adrenaline I need for that last 5 or 10 minutes. Those are the stuff we're kind of pulling back up right there. And we are lucky to have lived through it. And it is great to think that we are still in the midst of it right now. That's so true. All right, very, very final comments. Indoor Cycling Association talking about how far Bennett threw the ball in the air on the Mitchell touchdown. It's great to see. Dogboat Matt says, was at Disney's Magic Kingdom Sunday with my red and black Georgia shirt and shorts. No less than 5 different Ohio State people came up to me and said, we're gonna spank them. In fact, one of them said he hoped we would. Said he lived in Columbus, Ohio, and hates the Ohio. He said he hates Ohio State, Purdue grad. Yeah, it's kind of funny. So on the way back from the Orange Bowl last year, I drove my family to Miami. First of all, I would never drive to Miami again. I'd rather drive to Mars than drive to Miami. That's so far away. So far. Do not let the map fool you. That is a long way away. But the point is, driving back from Miami, we went to Epcot on the day after New Year's. And I had my Georgia stuff on. And it's kind of fun when you're in a place like that. My family, we go to Disney pretty good, but it's kind of fun to be walking around with your Georgia gear on. Everybody's coming up to you. And last year it was coming up about, hey, hope you guys beat Alabama. Hope you do that. It's like when your team is good and you're in the spotlight at a place like this, that's kind of a fun feeling. And so I'm glad you had some of that too. And certainly be nice to get that big win against Ohio State. Now we got to get ready to go. Scott Harris was at the 2006 Peach Bowl. I remember that very well. Georgia's down 24-3 at the half to Virginia Tech and came back and won. The 2006 Georgia team was kind of a sneaky fun team because for a while they were awful, but as the season went on, they got a lot better. They killed Auburn when Auburn was ranked like the top 5. Had a kind of a fun win against Tech back when that kind of meant something. And the Peach Bowl come from behind win was a big deal too. 2006 was sort of a weirdly enjoyable season when Georgia actually lost a huge number of games. Let's see what else. Frank Patterson also remembered the 2007 Sugar Bowl, the beat down on Hawaii when we should have been playing for the national title was glorious. It was, and that was also, I've always enjoyed the debate about who should either be in the BCS back then or the college football playoff now. And I just remember being so mad that when you had the West Virginia loss and whatever else happened, and that Georgia was supposed to move up, and it was pretty obvious that the powers that be were going to conspire to keep that from happening. You know, the message went out, Georgia can't be in there because they didn't win their division. Even though a couple of years later they would, change their tune on that to benefit Alabama. I just remember being so angry about that. So while it was fun to watch Georgia just, absolutely just throttle Hawaii in the black jerseys, no less, there was an element of that season that I was really, really mad that Georgia didn't get picked for the BCS championship. Really, really mad. Should have been Georgia LSU is what it should have been. And I just remember being very, very upset about that. So, yeah. DMart42 says, would Mark Richt have won the national title if there had been a playoff? Yeah, I mean, that 07 team, I think by the end of the year was playing as well as anybody was. They were red hot at the end of that season. And that's the kind of team that I think could have done very well in the playoff. B.A.'s Cardigan says, do you think it's fair that Georgia got the tougher draw even though they're the number one team? I think what ultimately happened is that Georgia got the concession about where the game was played, and Michigan got the concession about who it played. I think that's ultimately what happened here. And it's you know how like when you win the toss in football, that what you actually get a chance to do is make a choice. You can choose the ball or you can choose the end of the field. A lot of people don't realize this, but that's the choice you get a chance to make. Do you want the ball or do you want to choose your end of the field? And people always choose the ball. Now, sometimes they defer their choice, but they're not. But they still can. If you deferred, you actually could choose to not have the ball, but decide which end of the field you wanted to be on. Who knows? Maybe in some really windy game, somebody's done that before. But that's the point. It's like, what matters to you more? Where you're playing on the field or actually having possession of the football? I think there's a little bit of this is true for the two undefeated teams, Georgia and Michigan. What matters more to you? Where you play the game or who it is that you play? And I think for Georgia, I think where it plays the game is far more important than who it plays. Even Ohio State, who I would say is probably better than TCU, that if you wanted to give Georgia the absolute top benefit of being the number one team, Georgia should be playing TCU in Atlanta. That would be the biggest benefit you could give to the number one overall team. Ultimately, they gave Georgia a benefit, and they gave Michigan a benefit. They gave Georgia the benefit of playing in Atlanta. They gave Michigan the benefit of not having an immediate rematch with Ohio State. And I guess in a roundabout way, that's somewhat unfair to Georgia, but ultimately the value of playing in Atlanta, I believe, supersedes any perceived value of who it plays or who it avoids or anything like that. So it's kind of a long answer to a short question, but that's kind of that. Thomas Tyson also reflecting back on the Mike Leach news, as we've talked about in today's show. Marie Just Me says, would y'all have rather played in Michigan again than Ohio State? I mean, you may get your wish and play both. And I think that the way I think about this, and somebody mentioned this to me on Twitter, Georgia's already beaten 5 ranked opponents. If you could win the national championship by marching through the two big boys in the Big Ten, Ohio State, then Michigan, then I think you absolutely have to make some room at the kind of historic level for Georgia. I think you have to take it very, very seriously of putting Georgia in a conversation of one of history's best teams if that's the run they make to an undefeated 15-0 season. I believe you'd absolutely would have to. Anything else? Star Wars Dog says, what's the word on Todd Monken? I guess had been in chatter for the Purdue head coaching job. I haven't heard anything new on that. I'm sure they want to move fast. So the fact that you're not hearing much new on that may mean there's not a ton there. Maybe. The other one you're hearing now is the idea that Buster Faulkner might be in line for the Tech offensive coordinator job. I think that's a pretty big deal, but I think it's also really hard to keep a guy like that employed as an analyst for too long. It's just, guys want to move up. And as it stands right now, Georgia doesn't have a coaching position to offer Faulkner. So you'll keep your eye on that. We're also going to have other head coaching jobs that kind of come available too. So I guess you won't completely stop watching the Monken thing until it's all said and done. But Monken to Purdue had been out there. Faulkner to Tech is out there right now as offensive coordinator. So, yeah, the one thing that seems to have gone away is the talk of Trey Scott to Arkansas. We told you about, them taking a look at the guy from Baylor. It seems like Scott is content to stay at Georgia for now, but the other stuff, it seems like it's going to stay out there for a little bit. Let's see what else. Frank Patterson says, if I'm Monken, I don't take the Purdue job. He says, I'm going to hold out for a Penn State, Oklahoma, Texas A&M, bigger brand type job. Yeah, that could be the case. I would say that in the future, you think of Purdue as sort of a mid to lower level program, but it's also in one of the two leagues that have a huge financial advantage over the rest of college football. So I don't know how much in the future anyone's turning down Big Ten or SEC head coaching jobs just because financially they are so much better positioned, even a team like Purdue, so much better positioned than some of the rest of college football. But, it could be the case. I mean, if you should go watch the Todd Monken interview from the Broyles Award thing the other night. Like, Monken's a pretty salty guy, right? I mean, he's definitely no nonsense. A phrase like that was invented to describe Todd Monken. Like, there's a certain part of being a head coach where you got to play the game and you got to be, happy, smiley and, saccharine sweet sometimes. You got to do some of that. And Todd Monken does not do that particularly well, doesn't try to do that. So, it could be that making $2 million, he's the nation's highest paid assistant. It could be that, hey, this is enough for me. I'm not recruiting. I'm not working with the media. All I'm doing is kind of calling my plays here. He's obviously having a good time during the SEC championship. Maybe he's just sort of happy doing that, and the extra responsibility is something that doesn't necessarily thrill him right now. But if he wants to be a head coach, I actually think Purdue is the kind of job that you probably do say yes to. But we'll see how that plays out. All right, last comments for real this time. Randy Hall also shouting out Brock Bowers for winning the Mackey Award, a much-deserved honor for him, and it was great to see. And the other thing is, we were talking earlier about how the ways in which you measure Georgia's success. This is another cool one there, too. Roquan Buckus 2017. DeAndre Baker Thorpe in 2018. You had Rodrigo win the Groza Award after that. Then you start getting into all the stuff that happened a year ago. Like, Georgia has become a massive player on the national award stage. Massive player on the national award stage as of late. I think that's great. David Hogue, thanks for the kind words. I just love seeing all these national awards. It's just fun. I don't even really know why it's so much fun, but it's just really fun to see. All right. Got to go. Thanks for being here. R.S. Andrews, thanks to them for making it possible. Air conditioning, heating, plumbing, electric. What that means is, as we head towards winter and it getting colder outside, getting that heating system tuned back up to factory fresh specs. That's what our friends at R.S. Andrews can do for you. So you can find them online at rsandrews.com for a lot more on that. Also, our friends here at the AJC, they have got some great things going on for you right now, too. You're following all the big news as Georgia Tech tries to fill out its coaching staff. Some of that may be overlapping with Georgia. Great time to go there and, check out what's going on with Tech as it kind of finishes off its staff here. Looks like Chris Winke's staying as quarterbacks coach, and then you start thinking about what's happening with the rest of the coordinator stuff. You can get all of that online there as well. Plus, with all the serious stuff going on, politics, whatnot, you can get that online, ajc.com as well. Also, it sounds like gas prices may be coming down a little bit, so that's kind of neat. And recap of the state championships in high school football here this weekend, too. Final rankings are out. You can get all of that online as well, ajc.com for a lot more. AJC.com for that. Thanks for being here today. So much fun to be back doing the show again. And we'll look forward to doing it all again with you back here again tomorrow there as well. DawgNation Daily presented by Pella Window and Door of Georgia. We will look forward to talking to you then.